All right, we're going to go on to Chapter 10 of Sparrowhawk Red. And if you remember, at the end of Chapter 9, Soledad had started eating out of the trash can, and she was trying to get Ricky to do the same. So we will see what he ends up doing. So Chapter 10, Ricky balked. Hurry, Soledad called, cramming her mouth with a handful of taco makings. Still, Ricky could not move. This was madness, absolute insanity. The game had gone too far. But then he shook his head and took a deep breath. Mom's dying wasn't a game. It had never been a game. Nor was the beating he took in the alley yesterday. This hunger that chewed at his belly was anything but a game. He wrinkled his nose at the dead smell of rotted food. Soledad used both hands to stuff handfuls of food into her mouth. Her ruddy cheeks bunched full like those of a pocket gopher. Reluctantly, Ricky poked through his can. Under some paper and cardboard, he uncovered a glob of refried beans. His hand shook as he dipped 2 fingers in and scooped the mash to his tongue. It didn't taste all that bad. Hunger took over. Ricky shoveled up a whole handful and wolfed it down. Next, he dug out 3 half-eaten chicken wings. Without thinking, he wiped them on his jeans and then gnawed at each. Again, he glanced at Soledad. She hung half in, half out of her can, ejecting bits of trash over her shoulders. Ricky found most of an enchilada buried in cigarette ashes. This he couldn't handle. Underneath were 2 crushed bananas with black, shriveled skins. They peeled easily, and he gulped down the brown, mushy insides. Still chewing, he burrowed deeper. Quitate, I don't know if I'm saying that right, bellowed a gruff voice from very near. Ricky came up so fast that his head hit the can. He had not heard the back door open, but the booming voice shouted, "Get out!" took away his breath. Not 10 feet away, a massive man in a white chef's uniform brandished a shiny butcher knife. Ricky froze as if touched by an electric fence. Con, screamed Soledad. Her voice snapped Ricky loose. He obeyed and ran after her. Ahead she stopped. He looked back. The chef stood wheezing near a light post, swearing. Soledad grabbed up a rock and pitched it sharply, barely missing the big man. Oh my goodness. Now he'll chase us, she said with a smile, her eyes sparkling. Sure enough, the knife-waving chef ambled after them, his barrel stomach swaying like jello. His footsteps pounded on the street. Ricky took off running, his clumsy huaraches flopping. He looked back. Soledad stood in place, clapping her hands. Bueno, bueno, she screamed. When the man was nearly on her, she ducked, then ran, weaving left and right to keep him off balance. The whole thing reminded Ricky of a hippo chasing a squirrel. Soledad bounced and darted as she ran, her bony legs churning wildly. This was obviously not her first chase. Quickly, they outdistanced the chef. This relieved Ricky, but set him to thinking. Part of him was angry. The guy had scared the innards out of him. And for what? Taking some garbage? Then another thought struck Ricky, and he laughed aloud. He'd heard of having to eat and run, but never like this. It was Soledad's fault. She had thrown the rock, badgering the chef into chasing them. This knuckle-headed girl had helped him out, but now she was going to get them killed. Wheezing, the chef kept lumbering after them. His knife glinted in the noon sun. Ahead, Ricky spotted other garbage cans set out for dumping. He slowed to encourage the chase. Rapido, rapido, Soledad screamed back. As he approached the cans, Ricky slowed even more. He could hear the chef's rasping breath. The fat man closed the last 10 feet and swung his knife in a whooshing arc. Ricky dodged and caught the edge of a full garbage can. He tipped it into the path of the raging chef. A tremendous collision shattered the air, then a solid thud and a loud grunt. The knife slid clanking against the curb. Soledad jumped up and down, laughing and clapping like a cheerleader, although Ricky had never seen a cheerleader who looked like her. Bravo, bravo, she shouted as he rejoined her. Ricky looked back. The big man lay sprawled on the street, his white uniform ripped and soiled. He writhed, clutching his knee, bellowing and cursing. I hope we didn't hurt him. Now maybe we'll have to throw 2 rocks so he'll chase me, Soledad said, sounding disappointed. Hope we didn't hurt him? Are you crazy? He was chasing us with a butcher knife. Has he chased you before? She nodded. Sometimes he carries a bigger knife. She stretched her arms wide until they bent backward. The chef struggled to one knee, a crazed look in his eyes. Still, he kept hollering obscenities. He doesn't look happy, Soledad said. Let's go. Together they ran until the loud shouting faded away. When they stopped, Ricky turned to Soledad. Why didn't you tell me he's chased you before? It would ruin a good meal, she said with an impish grin, still panting from the chase. Good meal, Ricky choked. You didn't say anything about it being from a garbage can. She looked puzzled. Where did you want to eat? She asked. At a table? Her giggly laughter split the air. You're weird, Ricardo. When she saw him not smiling, she frowned. Her large black eyes turned serious. Don't be mad. We're amigos, no? Ricky couldn't avoid her pleading stare. I guess we're friends, he answered. Still, she looked hurt, so he added, All right, thanks. Thanks for the food. You're very welcome, she said, bowing low. Her smile stretched nearly ear to ear. Ricky thought of what he should do next. He wanted to go home, but without money and decent clothes, it would be nearly impossible to go back through the border. His original idea of going after the plane would be easier and a lot faster. Listen, he said to Soledad, I need to go to Rancho Camacho. Again, the fearful look stole into her eyes. Why? I can't tell you. No, don't. I mean it, she said. They have guns this big. Again, she spread her skinny arms. They'll kill you. You won't ever come back. Soledad was half right, Ricky thought. He hoped he would never come back here. Ignoring her, he turned and started walking west, toward the edge of the city. Soledad trailed behind him, eyeing him. She followed for a mile until they reached the open desert. Then she stopped. Don't make them mad, she called. I'll wait here. Ricky turned. Her eager yet stubborn look left him feeling guilty. But why? He'd come to Mexico to get an airplane. Who was she to him? Telling her about the airplane would only cause troubles. Still, he felt sad. I'll wait, she repeated with an imploring gaze. Ricky turned away toward Rancho Camacho. In the distance, thunder rumbled. To the south, huge black clouds churned on the horizon. A light breeze was nudging at the clumps of tumbleweed. The prospect of bad weather hadn't bothered Ricky earlier. Now the air felt heavy and foreboding. He kicked at a cloud of dirt with his bare toes and immediately regretted it. Nothing had gone right since he'd come to Mariposa. He began to walk fast, and for more than one reason. After dropping over the first low hill, he slipped out behind a mesquite bush. He had to urinate. Soledad had been right. Rateros would be kicked out of any store or restaurant if they went inside to use the bathroom. But after criticizing her for how she'd relieved herself in the street, he didn't dare do the same thing. Instead, he had clenched his teeth and curled his toes for 2 hours. Finishing, Ricky continued on toward Rancho Camacho. His plan now was simple. First, he would go to the ranch pretending he was looking for work. Then he would approach the Skyhawk as if curious. When no one was watching, he would crawl in. Suddenly, Ricky thought of something. He no longer held his jackknife. If the keys weren't in the ignition, how could he cut and strip the ignition wires to get the plane running? Answering his own question, Ricky spotted a discarded tin can. He picked it up and twisted off the sharp, bent-back cover. It would have to do. He'd hoped desperately that the ignition wiring was the same as the biplanes, and with luck, the Skyhawk would be gassed up. Ricky kept walking. This gravel road was not used heavily like the main highway entering Mariposa from the north. Only 2 cars drove past. The desert sun simmered high in the sky. A movement out among the mesquite caught Ricky's eye. A dusty kit fox trotted from behind a stand of barrel cactus, dragging a long rattlesnake in its mouth. The miniature fuzzy-haired fox glanced around nervously as flashes of lightning joined the thunder only miles away. Gray banks of rain hid the horizon. The uncertainty of this flight haunted Ricky. Flights back home were all planned out. Sometimes a small airplane couldn't take off from a high desert strip on a hot day. The air wasn't dense enough to hold the weight. With the radar and a lot of fuel, the plane might be overweight. If only he could call the flight service station for a weather report. Even on clear days, high wind could bugger a flight. Today there was no access to such information, and a storm brewed to the south. He would be climbing into a strange, low-powered airplane with no preparation. Oh, no. Ricky wished his father were here to help. Benito always seemed to know everything or have clever ideas up his sleeve. Again, the thoughts of his father brought back feelings of anger and bitterness. If Dad had done what he should, if he hadn't been a quitter, none of this mess would have happened. Ricky worried most about the Skyhawk. Was it kept in good condition by the drug smugglers? Or was it a heap of tin held together with chewing gum, baling wire, and shoestrings? What kind of runway was there for takeoff run? Was there a windsock? This whole thing was a blind turkey shoot. Soledad had said Rancho Camacho was out 5 kilometers or a little over 3 miles. Ricky figured he'd walked several kilometers already. He licked his finger and held it up, then tossed a handful of dust into the air and watched it drift. The light wind blew southward. That meant a takeoff facing the north with the western sun on the left. There would be no time to puzzle over things like wind direction once the show started. As he figured his plan, Ricky kicked a can down the littered ditch. Because his bare toes jutted from his homemade sandals, he side-kicked the can like a soccer ball. With each kick, he pretended to score a winning goal. A dozen buzzards lined the highway, perched boldly on fence posts. They croaked and clapped their big wings as Ricky passed. At Rancho Camacho, there would be no pretending. Everything would be real. The people, the airplane, the danger. Deliberately, Ricky kicked harder. The gravel road climbed and dipped its way across the rolling desert, each rise blocking view of the next. As Ricky trudged up a long slope, he thought of Soledad. Something about that crazy girl had gotten to him. He hoped she would be okay. That notion struck him funny. She'd be just fine. She had taken care of herself and him too, since he'd shown up. He'd never admit it to her, however. She'd probably puff up her chest until it popped like a balloon. Intently, he kept going. Because of his kicking and because of the rolling road, Ricky failed at first to notice the parked car. He looked up to find a new tan-colored car with U.S. license plates directly ahead and very near. The driver sat alone, watching him approach. Ricky had no choice but to keep walking. Deliberately, he kept kicking the can. The driver watched him approach, then suddenly brought a camera up and snapped a picture. So now we have another little mystery at the end of this chapter. Who do you think is in that car taking a picture? All right, I'll see you guys for chapter 11.